just a little side note and just something that was on my mind that I wanted to talk about. I want to do a lot more of these for my show instead of just kind of going through some of the news topics. But I was talking with a buddy of mine about kind of what I'm doing with the comic book stuff and everything, like what my insight, like a close friend, insight on what it is that I'm doing and why I'm doing it and all that. And I remember bringing this up before on my channel and on my show, and definitely when I've talked about this. But also, I think that what we see with media in general and people that, let's say, mega corporate entities that own them, a lot of stuff that general fandoms actually care about, they don't value, as in the companies or whatnot don't value them. And I think that's such a naive thing, of course, but I also think the folks that are, who I deem as normies, like that's not an insulting term. You may be insulted by it, but whatever. It's a term that I use to certainly describe folks that just aren't very knowledgeable on the material. It is that, like, if there's abundance of source material, they're not very knowledgeable. They may know of something, but they're not that knowledgeable on it. And like I say all the time, like me being a Star Wars normie, something like that. But fandoms, people that are very invested in it, and it's not just with the money. Of course, they're invested money-wise. They'll buy your products. I think that's a big part of it, of course. But it's not just that. Like, they're emotionally, intellectually even invested in some of these brands that have stories behind them, meaning that it's not just a figure. It's not just a thing. It's more of, this character has a journey and it may be attached to this other character or this, like, whatever it is. So when you get entire franchises, the story is generally being told. The fandoms themselves care about the minor details that the normie would not give a shit about. Okay. Now, what's happened now is that the mega corporate entities now control a lot of brands that you guys knew and love. Now, of course, I've been making a case for alternatives to pop up and be very competitive, so people don't feel like they have to always latch on to these old brands and keep giving them the benefit of doubt. But neither here nor there. The mega corporate entities that have bought these companies out that now have these properties, for them, they look at it like, okay, bottom line, can I sell merchandise off of this item? Is the name recognition enough for me to put out item, be the movie or show or whatever, that's going to have some sort of economic, like, success because of it? That's really all that they look at. So even if the entity was built upon the fandom, like I argue that things like Star Wars, for example, that was something that was built by the fandom. And what I mean by that is that it was something that a lot of people got into when it came out, when you look at the original movies, it was something that people they got really, really into that. And they were really intrigued by the stories. And of course, that developed into having, a more expanded universe. You had all these books and stuff that were being wrote, certainly on this. It was a franchise that was basically, material was being made, not to say that everything was liked by the folks that were part of these fandoms, but the material was geared more towards them. Now there's been a pivot, including with Star Wars, where what they make, or rather the material that comes from the franchise, be it in brand name, is more so geared to almost nobody. It's funny, we can say that, well, they make it for the normies, but what exactly does that mean? Because often, like, a normie is gonna watch whatever that looks kind of cool. They're not really into this stuff like that anyway. So you don't really ever have to sacrifice another audience for the sake of appealing to a normie. Like, you can't, like, okay, I'm making this, or you can, but if that's your excuse, is a very lousy one, because really, again, they're going to like whatever. So it becomes a free-for-all at that point, right? Where you have people that work for these brands now that don't really care. The mega corporate entities that own them don't really care. They're hired this person, this person's proved they don't even like this shit, to be completely honest. They're, like, not knowledgeable on it. It's just another gig for them. and they'll have them write a story that may be completely disconnected. But what I particularly take issue with, and why I am so like amped up to start my own stuff, is because in doing so, you've had people, a lot of them normies, but not exclusively, that have then tried to gaslight all of these other people that have been a part of these fandoms for decades, man, and act as if something like this has to happen for it to see some sort of level of success. So when you see something like what Halo's doing, it's like, well, it has to have a wider appeal. That's what the Amazon with the Rings of Power thing. It has to have this wide appeal. So we have to either dumb something down. We have to make these needless changes. But what they don't seem to understand is that those minor details, for any brand for that matter, not to say that everything's perfect and everything is just going to be streamlined continuity wise, because often, it'll happen where you see, well, that kind of contradicts the last events. But the audience, definitely of the fandom, can certainly tell when you're just completely not paying attention to it. And those minor details that you think, and it's funny because normies act like they don't care about that stuff either. Yet they'll sit and watch some YouTuber and he'll get hundreds of thousands of views. I've done it before. You look at for example, my that video was the last kind of big comic book movie ripified version of it that I did, where I would go through the comic book history. It's one of my most viewed fucking videos that I had done, where I reviewed the movie at the end, but I spent 2 hours or whatever going through the history of the Justice League, right? Normies love that type of shit, right? They love to get in on it because I guess they don't have to go reading books. They can just get, there's all these other YouTubers that do that all the time. So they like to think that they don't care about it or it doesn't matter, yet they certainly love to consume that type of information because it does matter. It does matter, and it certainly matters to the fandoms more than it would, let's say, a normie, but it matters. Those minor details when you, let's say, do something or depict a character that's out of character. What you end up doing is slapping in the face a bunch of customers. But also, how can you expect them to be intrigued by this long term? You can't. That stuff, the fact that there's people out there that try to gaslight and act like none of that stuff ever matters, right? When you see a character and that's how they are that's how they act, or this event happened. Therefore, because that event happened, this character would never do that. Like what you saw, for example, with like a Last of Us 2 or something with the whole Joel situation. Like, people that don't care think, oh, well, it just slipped up. Like, guy's been, surviving and he just kind of let his guard. Like, no, that doesn't make sense. You can say that. I know you're saying that he did it, but that doesn't make sense. So that's my thing, is that those minor details, they're not minor, I guess. Those details, maybe normies don't care about it, but certainly the fandoms that generally carry a franchise give a shit about that. And to reject it or act like it doesn't matter, it's so verifiably false, but it's also certainly insulting to a bunch of customers, like large swaths of customers. Lore, that stuff matters. You just listened to a clip from my podcast, For Canon's Sake, which is live throughout the week at 12 p.m. Central on youtube.com/YoungRipper59 and odyssey.com/@YoungRipper59. Be sure to check out my website, ericdjuly.com, so you can stay up to date with everything it is that I'm doing. You can also become a member and get access to a bunch of cool perks and exclusive content, which includes a social media hub where you can interact with myself and other members. It even has an app that you can get, which is now live in the Google and Apple stores.